My man,
What's
how
it?
are you?
Oh, good. How are you, Mitch?
Good to see you.
You too, man. Thanks so much for making time.
Pleasure. Pleasure.
Yeah, so I've had the word wonderful in my head all morning. Do you ever have
What's that?
words? I've had the word wonderful in my head all morning. I just go,
Uh-huh.
Wonderful, wonderful. I've just been ruminating on this word and saying it. Do you ever have words jump into your life and like this, euphemisms and that just kind of come out of nowhere, or even like a word like, I don't know, some esoteric word or something like that just arrives and then you're kind of sitting with it all day?
Yes. Sometimes it'll happen just as I'm coming to wakefulness in the morning, and that in between state where you fluctuate between sleep and cognizance is a very remarkable time, as you've probably found. And things will come into my head, sometimes single words, sometimes an ideal, sometimes a wish that I'm holding will reach me in a single monosyllabic word. It can be very, very simple. And of course, it's tricky for the seeker because our language is so culturally conditioned. A word will sometimes enter my head that would mean a different thing if held by another person. And it has a specific quality if held by me. And I think we have to just give our psyches permission to hold on to the meaning that we hold for the word.
God,
But
well
yes, that does
said.
happen, yeah.
It does, man. That's cool. That's so cool. I'm wondering, and I'm going to rant for a second about how I came across you and all of what's sort of what led me to immediately connect with you was, of course, as you and I have talked about, my background growing up,
Yeah.
Christian Scientist,
Yeah.
which was not cool. It just wasn't a cool thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it just wasn't hip, that's for sure. And I grew up watching MTV in the off hours of church, and then you go to church and it's like you have to wear this suit, and it's very kind of and I have a huge gaping love for Christian Science now, but in early days it was just not cool. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I couldn't find any place to translate it in the world where like, oh yeah, oh, this person too. Oh, that's cool. None of that was happening early on. And though my mom, who's this beautiful woman who has adopted Christian Science since she was very young by her mother, who experienced miracle healings. She's talked herself out of being raped before by talking about God principles and the principles of Christian Science, at least of what God is. And she's had all these miracles. And so it was always like this hidden cool. It was like I knew my mom liked it. My mom was my idol, but nowhere else could I find a translation. And so it was one of these things that later on in life, I just like couldn't wait to get on the road to being my own seeker, and finding my own way. And Buddhism stood out to me, certainly. But then at a certain point, somebody handed over A Course in Miracles, and I started reading that and going, wait, this is the God that I kind of grew up with. And this person was cool who was handing me this book saying, hey, check this thing out. And I was like, wow, there's a port for this early thing that I felt like was awkward and weird. And, you would hear about Robin Williams being a Christian Scientist or even Ellen DeGeneres. And these examples who were kind of like, that was my childhood and I don't like talking about that anymore. So I related a lot to them, but you couldn't find anybody where it was cool. And then through A Course in Miracles, which led to New Thought and Emmett Fox and then Joel S. Goldsmith and writers like this, cooler people as I moved through life knew about these writers and knew about these concepts. So when I come across you in like 2018, when you're on the DTFH, and immediately I connect with your words and I'm like, oh, he's one of those people. So I guess my question is to you, how did you come across, eventually Neville Goddard, but
Yeah.
what leads you in your life to having this be something that makes sense, this path?
I appreciate that. And first, I'm so glad for what you shared both privately and just now in terms of your familial connection to Christian Science. I have no familial connection to Christian Science, but I do feel very strongly that our culture, I felt this years ago, I feel this today, has never come to terms with the radical metaphysic that Mrs. Eddy brought. And I think many people within the so-called alternative spiritual culture, the New Age culture, what have you, whatever the culture of spiritual therapeutic search is, would be surprised if they read Science and Health, would be surprised to see how familiar they are with that metaphysic in its concentric ripples from the source as Mrs. Eddy was. And of course, there were other sources too. And I read a great deal about the Quimby-Eddy controversy in my book, One Simple Idea, a controversy that as you get closer and closer to it, the differences grow smaller and smaller.
Wow.
I'm speaking, of course, of the mental healer Phineas Quimby, with whom Mrs. Eddy studied for a while. But Quimby's papers weren't published until 1921, and Science and Health came out in 1879. And I don't think that many of my friends in the New Thought world, where I have many, and of which I am a part, understand fully how their vocabulary and metaphysic extends from Mrs. Eddy, because she was so early a communicator of the idea of immateriality.
Right.
And I feel tremendous admiration for her, and I feel the sense of frustration that I think one always feels when drinking deeply from well waters, that our culture drinks in a shallow way from well waters, but still wants to talk about the properties and chemistry of the waters. And one really needs to go deep. And when I was working on my book, One Simple Idea, which is a history of the positive mind movement, broadly defined, during that particular time, that book came out in January of 2014, the church and its archives really opened their doors to me. And that changes based on who's running things and who's in charge. Like any other human organization, administrations come and go. But at that time, there was, in my estimation, a really wonderful searching administration that was not only willing to open its doors to non-Christian Science researchers and historians like me, but was willing to sustain a conversation about how strict the church ought to be in terms of its relationship to material medicine. And there were some people at that time, and I remember it vividly, and I found it very hopeful. There were some people at that time who said, look, what are we running here? We're supposed to be helping people. I remember there was one practitioner who said, I will never deny treatments to somebody. I don't care if they're seeing a mainstream physician. Others would say, well, you can do whatever you want, but if you see a mainstream physician, it will be less effective. And then you had obviously more orthodox voices saying, that's not what Mrs. Eddy intended, and we don't combine prayer therapy treatments and mainstream medical treatments. And many years have passed, and I don't know how that debate played out in the church, but I did feel at that time it was the subject of an authentic search. It was the subject of an authentic discussion. And I remember a very high-ranking administrator in that church at that time. I was really very surprised, but he said to me in great frankness, he said, look, this is demographics. We're going to disappear as an organization if we don't find a new relationship to material medicine. And he was of the wing of thought in the church that was advocating a more flexible attitude towards material medicine. And I always admired him. And I admire Mrs. Eddy. And I think it would be a jarring and pleasant surprise to a lot of New Age and New Thought seekers to read Mrs. Eddy. And they might think, wow, I didn't know I was drinking from these waters.
No kidding.
As far as my own journey, it really just began in childhood. I was a adolescent, racked with anxiety. Things were tough at home. There were financial disasters. There was divorce and so on and so forth. And I looked to spiritual sources to find strength, find solutions.
Wow.
That had always been part of my search and my background. I later branched off away from it, got, I would say, probably more involved for a time with mainstream Judaism. That became dissatisfying to me in my early 30s. I came from a Jewish background. I had an Orthodox bar mitzvah. Although at that time, certainly in my world, in Belrose, Queens, there wasn't much talk of Kabbalah. There wasn't much talk of any of the mystical sides of Judaism, which ironically find fuller expression in some of the Hasidic communities than they do in some of the more so-called liberal communities. My world was traditional. It was sort of in between, where you were expected to learn your Hebrew and not spend too much time thinking about the meaning of the universe. So eventually I moved away from that world, and I was working in this job. I was in corporate publishing, and I was fired from a publishing job. And long story short, I found a new job at what was at that time a slightly backwater New Age press. And friends thought I was nuts to go there, but I take a yes very, very seriously. And I ask people, watch for yeses with great care. They're meaningful. And unless you have a very good reason to the contrary, accept a yes. You could be accepting a great gift. So I accepted the thing. And I started to read deeply into the backlist, and I discovered books like Science of Mind by Ernest Holmes, for example, and a whole wide range of other books and figures of that vintage and era, eventually discovering the work of Neville Goddard, who became formative. And it changed everything for me. It reawakened all these childhood questions and fascinations with practical spirituality that was not just based in liturgy, prayer, tradition, and of course some measure of ethics, but was intended to provide technique and method in the here and now, in a very, very concrete sense. And it changed everything for me. Eventually, I rediscovered myself as a writer through that path, because I came to feel that some of these figures, like Mrs. Eddy, deserved defending. They were not understood in the mainstream. And it dawned on me that almost everything I've written, starting from my first book through my most recent, has had some element of that, of wanting to defend a thing or an idea who I think has been maligned or mistreated. Mrs. Eddy is an example. The great parapsychologists like J.B. Rhine, Frederick Myers, many others who, up to current generations, Darrell Bem, Julia Mossbridge, Dean Radin, these are people whose works warrant defense. Neville Goddard, when I first wrote about him, was almost unknown. He was this British Barbadian mystic whose books were with one small but very good New Age publisher in Southern California. And even within New Thought circles, Neville was a mystery. He was a man of mystery. People didn't know, was he white? Was he black? Was he still living? Who was this guy? It was a name that was out there in the ether, but rarely was probed beyond that. So anyway, hand in glove.
Does it seem like, did Neville Goddard, is it obvious that at all that he may have read Mrs. Eddy's works? Or, it seems like within the generations, her works, I mean, I don't know if, I know that Joel S. Goldsmith was a Christian Scientist, and then kind of took it to the next level or whatever with the Infinite Way and his whole thing and his whole approach. And Ernest Holmes, even writing Science of Mind, I don't know his connection to Christian Science or not, but I mean, it feels like when you're reading it, it feels like not to be disparaging to science and health in any way whatsoever, but the archaic language, sort of, and it feels like it's Science of Mind has more heart or something, or it's like it feels like you're being talked to by a parent rather than like a stern principal who will lead you to healing, but not with a lot of gushiness.
I think that's well put. That was Mrs. Eddy, a very taciturn parent, and you know she loves you, but she is taciturn.
Like ayahuasca or something, just
And
like
don't
here
test
to do
that
the deal.
taciturn quality.
Right.
Don't test it. Because
Right.
that's what gave birth to these other movements. A lot of
Right.
people, including figures like Emma Curtis Hopkins and oh gosh, there was a wide range of people who were effectively expelled from Christian Science for testing Mrs. Eddy's resolve and with respect to tolerating suggestions of new ideas or even concurrent ideas. And the strictness and the orthodoxy that Mrs. Eddy would bring to bear resulted in a lost flock. And this
Right.
lost flock, along with people who had always been following the teachings of Phineas Quimby and Warren Felt Evans, among a few others, this lost flock found its own way. And this lost flock did a good job of updating the language. I think of a figure like Prentice Mulford, for example, who was a New Thought-oriented journalist who in the 1890s, early 1890s, he died young, gave us our vocabulary. He introduced terms like thoughts are things, thought is force, law of attraction, in the sense that it gets used today in the 21st century. And figures like Ernest Holmes, Prentice Mulford, Florence Scovel Shinn, among others, they were masters at communication. Look at their titles. I always tell first-time authors, the masters, they knew how to communicate. Those early pioneers, Science of Getting Rich, Think and Grow Rich, The Game of Life and How to Play It, Faith is Your Fortune. Those were titles. You don't forget.
Totally.
And so learn from them. They did a better job of popularizing the philosophy of mental causation, we'll call it, just for short.
Sure.
Psychical causation. They did a better job of popularizing than of refining it. Hence, we find ourselves in the 21st century locked into this generations old conundrum of the persistence of tragedy and the difficulty of end of life experiences, people living with chronic disease, and it's insufficient. And the 21st century public will not accept the sufficiency of saying, well, try again. Well, do this little wrinkle. Because, in fact, we live under a complexity of laws and forces. And psychical causation or correlation, a whole big debate could be had there. That's part of it. And that's as real as the words I'm speaking. But we live under and suffer a vast range of forces and natural laws. And I think that Christian Science, there is a certain taciturn genius within Mrs. Eddy's approach because it is denial of materialism. And I admire and I embrace the bravery of that approach. And one finds that approach within Neville Goddard, for example, who has been a huge influence on me.
Yeah.
But that denial of materialism will not come to terms with the ultimacy of experience, which includes tragedy, illness, mortality, physical decline, literally without exception, literally without observed exception.
Right.
And I'm trying to bring mind metaphysics or psychical metaphysics into alignment with the experience and the verified experience, I would venture, of complex laws and forces. That's my effort.
Yeah.
And I feel as though a figure like Neville, who maintains that your imagination is what is symbolically referred to as God in Scripture, Neville maintains that everything that the individual experiences in the most literal sense results from outpictured thought forms. I believe in that truth, and I love that truth. I also believe, paradoxically, that we experience a multiplicity of forces. And one has to stand within that paradox because I cannot deny it. It's
Yeah.
yin denying yang.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Beautifully said. First of all, Mary Baker Eddy was a woman in the 1800s. I mean, this is the thing that gets overlooked because the genius that she expressed within the revelation of that studying the science of Christ's words. Mm-hmm. If you study those like a science, and it's rooted in a sort of beyond even unconditional love, Mm-hmm. God is love. It's just a huge thing in Christian Science churches. It just says God is love. It was the first time I got exposed to that. But we can almost we lose the fact that she was a woman in the 1800s who was launching the most radical. I mean, at the time, I just mean radical to the landscape, mm-hmm. of America at that time. These ideas of no, don't seek medical treatment for that illness. Be right in your mind, and you'll be healed. Mm-hmm. Much like Christ did when he walked. Mm-hmm. But that she was a woman, I can't imagine how hard it was to launch this, and it's almost like the length of time that there was a flock and it was a bustling thing and it did move in America and spread for a while and then of course declined. But just that it accomplished that is incredible to think about in the times before women even had a right to vote in America.
Before they had a right to vote by more than a generation.
Right.
One goes by the calendar and. It's very hard to contain Mrs. Eddy in any one box. A lot like a very heterodox figure Mrs. Eddy would not have liked, Madame H.P. Blavatsky, who was a contemporary.
Really?
The extent to which these women remade themselves in a culture that was still roughly a generation even away from universal suffrage.
Right.
A culture that just a few years earlier had ended the Civil War and its carnage. An America that was still, in many ways, an agrarian rural nation that didn't have much in the way of libraries and universities and teaching hospitals. And it was incredible what Mrs. Eddy accomplished in so short a time, from the time she published Science and Health in 1879 until her death in 1910. Okay, 30 years. And on Thursday, she starts the Christian Science Monitor, a daily newspaper, which when I was a kid, when I was growing up, the Christian Science Monitor was one of the top 15 newspapers in this nation.
Isn't that wild? That's so true. I remember it being a legitimate publication. Yeah, and it came from this church that nobody was talking about in any other way, like in the mainstream at all. No one I ever met was talking about Christian Science, but then they had this popular thing that everybody... reviews or whatever. There was all kinds of news in the Monitor.
And I challenge people, go pull out political books, if you have any left from the 70s, let's say. Go dust off your old Noam Chomsky or whatever. In the footnotes, you'll find Christian Science Monitor very well represented, along with the Washington Post and New York Times and Wall Street Journal. There's a Christian Science Monitor. It would get cited constantly. And this is just something Mrs. Eddy did on Thursday afternoon, in between, founding a square block plaza in Boston and starting a newspaper and making Christian Science into one of the most widely spreading new religious movements of the 20th century. Her capacity to invent herself that way, there was so much to it. There was just so much to it. She understood so much. She was a genius metaphysically, but she was also shrewd as an organizer. She understood the so-called key person strategy. Go to a campus, convert the captain of the football team, and everybody else will come running. Go to a city, identify where do the fancy people live, buy a reading room where the fancy people live, and suddenly the church has the sheen of being upwardly mobile. And she understood that, and I don't fault her for any of that. It was organization building. But she had a message, and of course, it really wasn't until the 1890s in America, where allopathic medicine started to resemble something like what we know today,
Right.
because the state of American medicine was damn near medieval before that time. And for people in rural areas, could be very, very tough. And for women especially, it was very, very tough. I mean, my God, there were still practices lingering of so-called heroic medicine, where doctors would create weeping wounds or give you toxins to ingest to induce profuse sweating. This idea that you could sweat out your illness. I mean, this is practically from a Central European castle where we're trying to, cure the king of typhus. And these practices were persistent. And so Mrs. Eddy, too, was able to find an audience for a different kind of medicine, a different kind of metaphysics.
Born from illness also. I mean, she was like she had chronic illness or something like this. This is what I've heard. And then she worked in homeopathic. She was an early worker with homeopathic medicine. And this all kind of led to, I feel like the moment where she had I guess they always say that there's a notion of the second coming of Christ. And in our nation, when people talk about that, they go, "Oh, he's coming back, and like you better get ready, and he's coming back, and get your shit together," kind of thing. But like the second coming of Christ within Christian Science was her revelation. Like she wasn't the Christ, but she saw this was the second coming of it. Like we were missing the message of Christ's words and life.
I'm laughing because within the Abrahamic religious structure, if there's one thing we're good at, it's messianism. The end is always coming, and it's just about here. So get your shit together. Right. And every era, is a messianic era, and you go from a UFO cult like Heaven's Gate to the Orthodox Jewish sect, the Lubavitchers, whose headquarters is not far from where I'm seated, to Mrs. Eddy, to any number of New Age philosophies. It's coming. We are a messianic people, and our friends in the East, in Vedism, they dote upon different things. Maybe world cycles, karmic cycles. In Buddhism, different things. In Confucianism, different things. In various animist and shamanic traditions, different things, and they have their fixations. For us here in the West, who come from the Abrahamic traditions, messianism. We are superb at that. Totally. And all these messages about apocalypse and the coming end and signs and symbols of the coming end go on YouTube. Probably, I would guess 30% of the most popular videos from the last year probably have some investment in apocalypse. That's what we do. That's what we do in the messianic traditions. And
somehow it's like repackaged and repurposed to this old thing. Like it's always packaged to the new generation as, the end's coming. And I mean, like the talk is now, but it's not dissimilar. Yeah,
people are unhappy.
Sure.
You'll find messianism in Rastafarianism, for example, the Rastafarian movement. People are justly and understandably unhappy, and so not infrequently, Marcus Garvey, the pioneering black nationalist, he's sort of seen, in so many words, as a John the Baptist type figure to maybe the arrival of Haile Selassie, who is seen as a messianic figure, and the notion of we'll say a lost or subjugated tribe or people being expelled from its birthright or homeland and then being returned by the arrival of the messianic figure, whether it's found in Seventh-day Adventism in its own particular form and iteration, whether it's found in the movement of, say, Ethiopianism or Rastafarianism, whether it's found in, it's found this in Marxism. What else is Marxism but a secular Abrahamic religion? Instead of the rapture or end times, there's going to be the inevitable clash of economic interests with the worker as a kind of force of messianism, maybe helped along by John the Baptist in the form of Vladimir Lenin or whomever. And then there's going to be that's the before, and then there's going to be this clash, this sorting out, call it whatever you wish, Judgment Day, apocalypse, rapture, and then there's going to be the after, which is going to be some iteration of heaven on earth. And it's inevitable. It's inevitable as the cycle of the planets. And so within Marxism, you find, again, there's the Abrahamic impulse. Something is always going to end. There's always going to be some before and after. And those who are cast out, whether it's the lost tribe of Israel or whether it's the workers or whomever it may be, those who are or saved, born again, they're going to be high and dry.
Right.
Yeah.
It almost seems like, with the stark nature, I don't want to call it stark because that seems, I always refer to science and health. I've used it early on in my spiritual study that was independent of my parents and into my own life, and kind of picking up the book again. And especially when I would be really ill, I'd have a 3-day diarrhea thing or something, and I go oh God, I just feel so terrible, and I go, okay, I'm going to reach for the hard stuff, and I reach for science and health, and then I just read a few passages, and it would always make me feel better. And but I call it the hard stuff because it's not like it doesn't necessarily, what we're used to as feeling good and what we're used to as using that as a means of moving toward things is that if it feels good, if it doesn't feel good, then no. That measurement, that doesn't really work with this, because it's sort of the feel good that comes from reading Christian Science at moments of peril or moments that need healing. It always just cuts through my human drama into a bigger, wider perspective. And that's, of course, what later on Tibetan Buddhism has done for me, is just help me zoom out and see the larger story and not this individual suffering, story, just connected to everything. What was I going to say about that? What I do want to say is the way that you found your way to this path is the same way that that Christian Science came into my family's life. My grandmother is the child of rape. My great grandmother was raped, and she was attempting to save her sister, who was about to be raped, and she said, "No, take me. She's an invalid." So my great grandmother absorbed this rape, and then got pregnant, and then that's my grandmother. And my grandmother's born into this kind of household where there's unresolved trauma, and my great grandmother lived with my great aunt, and she just took care of her whole life, and they were close sisters. But my great aunt was ill, and so there was my grandmother grew up in this house of no answers for what's going on here, but could see that there was happiness outside of her house. And at a young age, I think she was 8, she decided to hitch a ride with the next door neighbors to go to church, because they were going to church, and she was like, I want to see what that's about. She had this idea at 8 years old that there's got to be a solution that isn't being presented in this household for the problems that are within it. So she started investigating churches before she was even 10 years old, going to a bunch of different ones, finally landing at Christian Science. And when she went into that church in an hour session, or an hour service, she learned more, sort of like what Timothy Leary says about psychedelics, that he learned more about the human mind in 4 hours than he did in all his years of study in psychology.
Yes, and I really dig that statement.
Yeah, me too. So she found that, and she brought it home, and she started taking her mother and great aunt to the church, and she brought Christian Science into the home, and it changed the home. And this precocious young girl who wouldn't accept what was going on in her house found this radical, sort of, at the time even still, it was kind of a radical religion in the way of we don't go to doctors. We only pray for healing. Yep. We don't go to no medical intervention, no materiality, that type of thing. But I think about that, and that's like she brought healing into her household, ended up getting married and raising 6 children, all of whom are still alive in their 80s and 70s, none of which were vaccinated. And this isn't a pro-vaccination, anti-vaccination thing. Yeah, I mean, just for the listeners, like I'm not trying to make a statement, but this is the house, this is the family I was raised in. So they're all still alive. My uncle had polio in the 50s, was healed of polio. There's all these stories of that healing can take place. And it came from the most unlikely subject.
Yeah.
And I feel like you as well, like this, how much your search from growing up in Judaism to sensing something not being right in the household, but you said financially or whatever it was, and it taking you on this wild adventure and this tour through mysticism and all different forms of Christianity and so on and so forth. Just, what do you say about that? Like that initiate, you at a young age, much like my grandmother, being hell-bent on, and I've been the same way, just studying traditions and seeing how they all link or where are they saying the same thing. Like, what do you say about being one of those people at a young age who sense that and the road that it's taken you on?
Well, I'll say 2 things. First, I want to say I immediately was struck that you're going to write a book called House of No Answers, because I like the expression that you use. So I'm saying it here first.
Sweet, man. Thanks.
House of No Answers is very evocative and
killer
and truthful. You know, I find, and there are some people who are not going to like this statement, but it's the truth. I find I like philosophies that are results-based. And I'm very interested in philosophies like Christian Science, where there is a before and after. And I know I have friends on the path who will think, here he goes again. This is where Horowitz, good guy, but just steers off into the old ditch. I do believe in before and after. I do believe in getting someplace. I do believe in using terms like success and failure. I do believe in using terms like happiness without twisting myself into knots defining it or asking which I is speaking of happiness. And I think we in the spiritual culture have done too much to flee certain very plain categories of living that we actually experience but deny in our vocabulary and in our formulation of things. There is a before and after in Christian Science. There is a state of sickness and there is a state of health. And it rests on a realization of truth, the truth of immaterialism. There is a before and after in New Thought. There's a before and after in a lot of the philosophies to which I am personally attracted. And I believe in it. I believe in it because I believe that our culture, with all its licentiousness, steals self-expression from people. Our subcultures steal self-expression from people. I used to have a friend who was a minister within the Science of Mind movement, the movement founded by Ernest Holmes. And to Ernest's credit, I think he was a devotee of Mrs. Eddy's ideas. He was also a heterodox exponent of those ideas who did honor so-called material medicine. And my friend would say, in his iteration, not my language, God can be in that little pill as much as in anything else. Why would you deny that?
Right. Or the physician. I always said that. It's just like, wait, I mean, is the physician not God? And, is there workability around her early findings of this direct science? Is there, can it be expansive?
Yes.
I mean, and maybe that's what you and I are like, I don't know, researching or studying to see whether or not that, like, it can messages that are so pure when they're originated over time to meet the need of dissemination to the public. Is there maneuverability? Can somebody see a doctor while they're reading Science and Health at home?
Exactly. And it could be that just as an unbidden stranger can be a disguised messenger, a thing that reaches the individual that runs contrary to what's in his or her mind's eye could contain the very solution, could contain that.
Right.
And so within our alternative spiritual cultures, for example, there's attitudes and outlooks, as in every subculture that might block the receipt of something that is that disguised stranger that's so provident but gets turned out because we don't like people who look like that here. You know, we always think
Yeah.
we're the ones who'll show like hospitality to the unbidden stranger, but we
Yeah.
don't, because the unbidden stranger doesn't reach us looking like Lazarus necessarily, and most of us turn Lazarus out. It reaches us in the form of something or someone that we may not like, but that
Yeah.
holds a real solution, a real possibility. And so I really feel that there are many people in this life who are suffering needlessly, who are very unhappy, who are deeply misplaced, who whose self-realization could come in ways that do have a before and after, and that do have maybe an unfoldment of something that's really meaningful to that individual that wouldn't be understood by their best friend. Their best friend would say, that's superficial or that's material. But the truth is, they might be so much happier embracing it. And that could be any number of things. It can be as varied as there are people. But I do think that there is an undigested cause and effect present in so many of our spiritualities that we don't know how to come to grips with it.
I wonder if that's a Western mind.
Sure.
I wonder if that's a Western mind. You know, I wonder if it's, well, we found something. We got to do something with it. That whole thing. Like early on with Christian Science, I liken what Mrs. Eddy discovered to, let's just say, within Tibetan Buddhism, it would be sort of like, you would say you skipped ahead to the highest teachings, and you just skipped all the grunt work, and you just have discovered the highest teachings in, let's say, Vajrayana Buddhism, the higher yanas. What I love about Buddhism is that it goes, just because we found this thing, we found the ultimate nature of reality, let's say, or the ultimate thing to practice. I mean, and within their tradition, there's a gradual path. There's a path that doesn't say, hey, study this, go straight to Vajrayana, the highest teachings, because we've discovered it. Now, a Western mind, if we discover something like this, we might go, oh, well, we found the best. We gotta just get it right out to the people. And there's this whole thing within Buddhism that's set up, at least with Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana, where there's a gradual process of understanding, and you are not asked to adopt the truest true of information that there is available within the tradition. You're in a gradual process of awakening, and I don't know if Christian Science had that sort of that kind of run of a gradual thing. It's just like, we found the truth, and it's just this, and you either study it or you know what I mean.
I think within Christian Science, and that's a wonderful, wonderful observation.
Thanks.
It seems to me there was a bastardized, unspoken version of that gradualization that you were referencing.
Yeah.
Because, for example, Mrs. Eddy was willing to abide what she called devices, which are eyeglasses, crutches. And implicit in that is that, well, look, the seeker is not far along enough to come into the full realization of truth. So he needs his eyeglasses. He needs his crutches. And it's said by Mrs. Eddy's critics, and I think they mishandle it. They just mishandle it, that she took analgesics towards the end of her life. I think she was suffering from kidney stones.
That's like the Bill Wilson thing that he drank on his deathbed, or like he did LSD and 20 years in. And
I think, and I might be misremembering, and so forgive me if I flub this in terms of the specifics, but I'm certainly speaking correctly in broad terms. Mm-hmm. She may have received morphine towards the end of her life for very painful kidney stones. And I don't condemn that. I don't see hypocrisy in that, because she tried her fullest with the theology that she had brought or discovered. And there's a certain point of agony where the individual needs help. And that help may come in the form of a device or in the form of an analgesic. And I think that was a kind of alienated acknowledgement of what you were just saying, that there is a kind of visionary gradualism. And it's not just, oh, now I'm awake, or now I'm born again, or whatever.
Can you imagine, like, it's glasses and canes that are like the, we don't think about that as far as medical glasses. We don't think about glasses as a part of the medical establishment,
Right.
But like that these were a controversial item, that glasses even, or a cane, but they were allowed, almost like you got to eat, right? I mean, you got to, you got to eat some food.
You've got to eat
to stay alive.
I'm drawing breath. I'm eating. I'm drinking.
I need to be able to read words until my eyes can see more clearly through a healing potentially.
So isn't that a tacit acknowledgement of the thing you're saying, that there is a gradualist experience not spoken of as such? And I think the church could offer that to people in a more fully articulated way. That's my point.
When I was growing up, there was the coolest guy in Christian Science. My church was, and I say this cool, I don't know why he stood out to me as cool back then, but he had this big beard, brown beard and ponytail. And I'm like, this guy's cool. And he kind of dressed like it was in the 80s, and he kind of like looked like somebody I might see in a band or something. And, but he worked for SETI. His name is
that's cool. Yeah.
Isn't that fucking cool? Dude, I'm telling you. Like, he's secretly sneaking off and doing Christian Science on the weekend, but he works for SETI. He's like monitoring the skies for extraterrestrial life.
He would probably have a hell of a hard time at work describing his religious commitment to his friends.
Right.
Which is why I counted silence. I think we talk just too damn much. I find there are some of the most impressive people I've ever met maintain a silence about their commitments. Like, for example, it occurred to me when you and I started talking about Christian Science, there is a prominent editor at a large newspaper who grew up in Christian Science. I don't know whether he still considers himself a Christian Scientist. I think he does. And he has been a friend to me and to my work, but he also hangs back because he doesn't want to seem as if he is stepping up to the bat for the team or something like that.
Right.
And I've always abided the privacy with which he maintains his spiritual commitment. I think at one point he made it clear to me that it was private. And I appreciate it, because we as a culture tend to feel like we have to show our bona fides and declare who the hell we are. And we want to be seen. We want to be appreciated. We want to be known. And I don't know whether your friend shared his commitments at SETI with his coworkers, but it obviously, and this is another sign, I think, of the church's, I would say, I have my criticisms of Mrs. Eddy, but she did imbue a great deal of intellectual excellence into the church. I have to say the same thing of the Mormon prophet Joseph Smith. So damn well-educated people within the Mormon church, very well-educated people. And the same thing is true of Christian Science. And you find a lot of engineers and people who are very successful in mainstream academic and industrial reaches of science, who also have a spiritual science. And it's interesting. It's interesting. I'm also struck, and I've issued this as a challenge to um, the New Thought culture, which has withered in many respects, not in its ideas, but in its institutions.
Yeah.
You walk into the archive at the Mary Baker Eddy Library in Boston, and that is one world-class archive. I mean, and it's the same is true of archives maintained by LDS, the Mormon Church. And I mean, I've had experience, as perhaps you have, of going to certain New Age spiritual centers, and you get looked at funny if you're asked where's the bathroom or something, and there's not the same maintenance of excellence around the organization, and that's a problem, because I think that I have to start by watering a houseplant before I can begin to get anywhere, wondering where did this houseplant come from, and I think that the intellectual excellence with which some of the new religious movements that might be considered more orthodox, one ought to pause over that and admire that and ask some questions about that.
Mm-hmm. Man, the thing you're talking about showing your bona fides, and then and that's in the culture to do that, and of course we're, in your new book in Esoterika. You talk about the it needs I forget, is it a hammer or a hammer to the conditioning or
hammer to conditioning is a good way of putting it.
Okay. So I mean and the conditioning is accomplishment. We're all addicted to accomplishing things to be able to say wherever we go that we're valuable. And we're on a track and we're doing things and people go, people, I guess, rate you on that. And I've been kind of addicted to that my whole life also, is like having something to show for my life. And it came from pain. I mean, it came from doubting myself in my youth and doubting my value and learning how to love myself later on in life, but not in this way. This was sort of like, can I be a good boy and keep people off my back? I don't want to have to answer to anything. So let me just do the next thing, and I'll have something to show. And is this good enough? Is this good enough? Am I there yet?
Yeah.
And that's that conditioning. These days, oddly enough, my study and application and ritual and all the practices that I do to keep myself well and on a path. This morning I was confronted with my ego. I was going, I've done more this morning. I had this beautiful morning of driving down there's a river nearby, and I went and sat by the river and I read from one of my Buddhist books, and I did guru yoga by the river, and I'm just there by myself. And then I came home and I did all these rituals here, and all of that I was confronted in my mind, and here I am telling it anyway, but in my mind I was going this is a potency that you don't need to share about. And that's what it's been lately, is there's a potency in doing the practices, but not telling everybody what you've done, or whatever it is that you're working on. And this potency, we walk around with it, and it actually opens more doors than actually being able to say, I'm doing this, that, and the other. Those kind of seem to close doors because people get either jealous or they get competitive. But just walking around with this potency, almost like a chi or something, I guess it could be considered, in some traditions, like a potency of not talking about your accomplishments and having that be a door opener when you go places rather than words.
There's so much to unpack in that. And we in the spiritual culture are addicted to talking about our accomplishments in the forms of experiences. And I will walk into a room and immediately, somebody wants to tell me I took ayahuasca and I talked to Jehovah and blah, 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 blah. And these experiences I'm so uninterested in them, frankly, because they're like somebody showing me their vacation photos. Are you there right now? Are you conversant with Jehovah or, whatever Devi it was, or, Krishna right now? Because if you're not, what are we really sharing? I mean, I might share an experience that occurred within a spiritual context to say, look, this happened to me, and so I value this path or this technique.
It's a demonstration.
Yeah, demonstration.
Right.
I value parapsychology because what can I say? I'm attached to that way of thinking, and it's valid, and they find influence for the invisible world within a laboratory setting, and it's replicable, and it's impeccable, and it's remarkable. And so there's something there to talk about. But the notion that I want to talk about this or that experience that's supposed to redound prestige to me in some way, it'll never be articulated that way, but that's not infrequently the implication, is a real bore to me and a real distraction. And it's just in the same. What can I say? What can I say? I mean, I have my own habits and ways of doing that as well, particularly in terms of material accomplishments, in terms of outer accomplishments. But to your point, I do share strongly the ideal that it's not necessary to talk about one's practice or one's divergence from other people's practices. I was just out in Wheaton, Illinois, and I was at a conference of the Theosophical Society. And within the Theosophical Society, there's a great deal of dedication to classical Vedism. And people misunderstand the extent to which Madame Blavatsky, who is seen as so heterodox a figure, was really very steeped in classical Vedism, as was her successor, Annie Besant. And at a certain juncture in this week, we were doing exercises, and a language was being used, an early 20th century iteration of the Vedas that's not my language. And there's a certain ideal of selflessness and non-attachment and service, a word I don't like, and not words that I use, that are not part of my search. They're not part of my outlook. And yet, I recognize that people in that room were having probing experiences, and they have a set of ideals that is integral and real and meaningful. And I want them to get somewhere. There would be a time and a place where I might raise my hand and say, I have a different point of view. My point of view might sound more like Emerson and Nietzsche and Crowley than the point of view expressed in this language. And there's a lot of diffusion in terms of how seekers approach things, and whether that diffusion converges on a single point, I don't know. It's not really my way of thinking. And I think that the capacity to allow someone to have their own experience with the expectation that I'm allowed to have my own experience, and that I can be a guest in that house and not feel that as a guest, I need to point out to them, well, I have a certain dietary law, I can, if I don't eat shellfish, then just pass the damn shellfish. It doesn't need to turn into a thing. And I feel we need to let one another be a lot of the time. Just let one another be.
Totally, man. Totally. God, that's so great. It's sort of like you're in Brooklyn, right? Are you in Brooklyn?
I am, yes. Yeah.
Okay, so the great saint from Brooklyn, Notorious B.I.G. He said, "Don't talk about it, be about it."
I thought it was going to be like Mary Cabrini or something. Yeah, right. I did. Yeah.
Don't talk about it, be about it, which is like basically Ramana Maharshi's message,
Yeah.
Yeah. Similarly, you helped me just now. In my view, my I guess I don't have an active cold case going on Osho or something and his life story. But when I watched Wild Wild Country and learned about it years ago, and very entertaining, of course. I love all cult docs, and I just love them all.
Same. We are imbibing them like endlessly. I didn't know
Totally.
there were so many cults in the Western scene until
No
I started
kidding.
watching Netflix. Now I'm
Yeah.
constantly involved in this.
Dude, totally. That one was an especially amazing one.
Yeah.
But, at the end, I watched it again recently, and I had forgotten that at the end of his life, just like what you were talking about Mrs. Eddy maybe taking morphine or something.
Yeah.
Like Osho just had basically Michael Jackson's doctor, prescribing him all, he was just high for he was just high all the time. And I judged that, or sort of here's the grift kind of thing, which I'm embarrassed about, because now hearing Mary Baker Eddy's story and going well, she was a controversial figure. Shit. So many people looked at her as maybe even a devil, turning people into people who are denying medical treatment. And of course, I always joke about Christian Science is when you have a religion that's based in spiritual healing, people are going to die. People are going to die trying, They're just like many families, I'm sure, who did not have the consciousness to be able to really understand Mrs. Eddy's words, would try and apply them. But and this is a thing around the notion of there being a gradual process to understanding things, but it'll probably prevent a lot of deaths. So I imagine it was a very controversial thing. But anyway, I always looked at Osho checking out in that last period of time as sort of showing a little leg that the whole thing was kind of a sham. But at the same time, he was probably just looked at in the same way that Mary Baker Eddy was. And so there's a very humanizing thing anyway for my application directly to Osho from what you said about Mrs. Eddy. Now I can look at it and go well, the last time I did watch that Wild Wild Country doc, also it was shown to me that maybe he was just meeting us where he knew that what we would be attracted to, and he was teaching. Certainly, so many people got true wisdom. There's a lot of people that walked from Osho's teaching and still even abide by his teachings and his legitimate teachings.
Yes.
So you just humanized Osho for me.
I beg your pardon?
You just humanized Osho for me.
There's so much to be said there. There's so much to be said.
Good.
First of all, there are great spiritual teachers, including, I think, the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who met Western man where he lives.
Right.
Western man is not going to become a renunciate. Western man is not going to walk the path of a yogi or a fakir. But Western man needs help. And Western man is very concerned with dollar business, as Gurdjieff used to put it. And so there are great teachers who met Western man where he lives. And apropos of Osho, listen, I'm very dedicated to the ideas of Jag Gurdjieff, and I have dedicated parts of my life and search to those ideas. And Gurdjieff was a tremendously heterodox figure, let's say in the 1950s. If the mainstream paid attention to him at all, it was in disparagement. And I don't know all the things that Osho did towards the end of his life, or whether he was ethical towards people around him. And there are questions about that. But at the same time, I stopped writing for mainstream media. I used to really covet mainstream bylines early in my career for all the obvious reasons. They're validating. And I gathered lots of mainstream bylines. And then I got really sick of it because I was being asked to sit in judgment of figures like Osho or Mary Baker Eddy, or the editor, without my input, would sit in judgment by, let's say, putting an inflammatory headline on a piece. For instance, I wrote an opinion piece for the Wall Street Journal, and they put on it the headline, "When Spirituality Kills." And it had something to do with some of the philosophies we're talking about. And of course, it was embarrassing, and I was pissed off, but
is it paradoxical to your points in the article also? I mean, a title like that, or paradoxical to your own beliefs?
The article was measured. The headline was sensationalistic. And within journalism, friction is sought. Sentences move, readers are kept, editors are pleased by the maintenance of friction. And so you're not going to get a contemplative headline. And I was asked by some editors to write a piece on cults? What are the warning signs of cults? And it's not an illegitimate question. It's a very legit question, but they wanted me to frame Wild Wild Country at that time had just come out, and so they wanted that to be the news hook on which the thing was hanged. And I made an effort to not be extreme in my judgment toward Osho. I certainly don't feel that way, and I consider him innovative. And yet the picture and the headline and everything else just communicates a shorthand that I don't like and that I don't feel. And so I got displeased enough with the cynicism of mainstream legacy journalism, at least towards the topics that we care about. I mean, if you want to learn about a hurricane, then read legacy media. They're very good on that, just like Wikipedia is really good on the Napoleonic Wars. Anything pertaining to the metaphysical or parapsychology, vastly less so. And I got tired of it, man. I really got tired of it. And I get tired of the shorthand in which the mainstream opinion-making institutions view these topics, including cults, a word that I think is overused. My definition of a cult is an isolating, abusive community of belief. And that's broad enough to encompass anywhere where people are suffering and separated on account of a spiritual point of view. But I think that just because someone had a bad experience one day in Alcoholics Anonymous or in the Gurdjieff work or in TM does not. Let's talk about the bad day. But to pin a label, as many of the cult experts do, it almost gets to this point of a kind of well, it's just the hammer nail problem. Everything turns into a nail when all I have is a hammer. And we have to be very careful of that. And that leaks into mainstream communication. It leaks into the social sciences. There's a misunderstanding of movements that just don't readily make themselves available to the kind of NPR psychologized Buddhism point of view.
Right.
It was funny. Any talk of efficacy, any talk of result, any talk of before and after within a mainstream setting is almost effectively disallowed because it crosses that barrier that we in Western culture have set up, in which you can talk about religious experience, and to a greater degree, you can talk about psychedelic experience, you can talk about Zen, you can talk about what you found during the grieving process within Christianity or Judaism or what have you. But the moment you get into talking about phenomena, the moment you get into talking about any concretized outcome, such as a recovery, unless you're really very gingerly stepping around that by talking about areas of your brain lighting up when you meditate or what have you. But when you start to stick your neck out in terms of phenomena crossing over into our concrete world, that's verboten within American letters, within American reference material, within academia, within legacy journalism. And it's narrow. It's really narrow. And it makes for grave difficulty in expressing any of these ideas outside of a very narrow mainstream, outside of a very narrow framework.
Right.
And that moved me away from wanting to communicate in the mainstream. And that was a big change for me because I wanted to be the guy who wrote about this stuff for the mainstream. And I tried very hard.
Isn't it cool that people like Duncan Trussell, who's has this popular podcast that you've been on a bunch and you're a regular of, this becomes a mainstream outlet almost of more along the lines of non-sensationalized and true exploration around Right. And thank God for these outlets showing up when you're so dissatisfied by what you found in the mainstream, of which you set your sights to go be a part of originally and wanted to be a part of. And then you find that like, oh, you guys are always sensationalizing things. You're always extremizing things. And there's some baby in with the bathwater, you know, in every situation. And so Duncan Trussell and people and outlets like this show up, you know, and to be able to allow you to get your message out to the mainstream in this way that is more intentionally correct with you.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's much more satisfying. It's more relaxing in the profoundest sense. A few years ago, I put out an anthology of writings called Uncertain Places. And I made a funny decision in that book, which I'm glad I made. And that is that I had written a piece for the New York Times about human rights abuses against accused witches around the world. And that piece went through a 6-month editing process. Holy 6 months. And I made the decision in Uncertain Places to publish my draft original. And I say to the reader, you take a look at this draft original, you take a look at the piece that was edited for 6 months, and you tell me which is better. Because I think it's a goddamn draw.
Dude, that's awesome. And that's so rad.
And only because the article in its subject matter dealt with people who were accused of witchcraft. It might be in poorer parts of the world, immigrant communities. And there was so much nervousness about the thing because the subjects were people who were not even necessarily identifying as witches, but might have been accused of witchcraft, say in Papua New Guinea or in Saudi or somewhere where that can get you in a lot of trouble, and if not killed. And I remember the editor saying to me, there was a fact checker who was going to call me, and he said, look, when the fact checker calls, you got to be 100% ready because we don't publish pieces like this very often. And my attitude was, pieces like what? It's a human rights article,
Totally.
And of course, the fact checker did call and didn't have any questions. I mean, that thing was as solid as a block of steel. But I wondered, what was the purpose of this 6-month editing process? I was proud of the bona fides it gave me for all the obvious reasons.
Sure.
But I was turned off by that 6-month editing process because I was like, look, again, I challenge anybody who feels like it. Look at both pieces side by side. Tell me. Yeah.
Isn't that so disappointing and it's also the source of our liberation, but we set our sights to being validated by, this, that, and the other. In your case, it was, journalistic outputs and
I'm still that way. I don't mean I've had this wonderful breakthrough the membrane, I'm still that way. I just decided that I can't do something happily if I'm around cynicism about my subject.
Yeah, it does though. I mean, I had to, like the Beatles almost, where they accomplished everything there is to accomplish and had all the girls and all the wealth and all the creative power and were looked at as gods. And they were still like, this isn't it. Like empty pockets, like, well, holy shit, we're here and this still isn't it. And of course, then they learn to meditate with the Maharishi, and they're given this access to this whole other world that matches more of the LSD world that they had been also exploring.
I think that's very true. I think that's very true. Yeah. I think
so. Even the people who had everything and all the power, and it was disappointing to find that. And that's what it was for me, is like, meeting a lot of my heroes and people that I really admire through this show, and, even developing friendships with them. And still, didn't solve the thing that was in me. I had to go to all those places and reach the high points to see that wasn't it either, only to lead me back to myself. And this disappointment that happens of finally getting there, like you said you were happy with all the bona fides that the article brought, of course, but at the same time, you're looking at the way that it came about, and what their internal system is like to put something through a 6-month process of changing it. And you go like, wait, this is what I'm excited about.
Yeah.
You know?
I have to admit that there are accolades that have and do still turn me on and excite me. And I would be dishonest in our exchange if I didn't say that.
Dude, awesome. Give me one, will you?
Being recognized by readers,
Right.
The other day I was in Batavia, Illinois, touring a particle accelerator at the Fermi Lab. And that was one fucking trip, let me tell you. I owe that to my wife, Jacqueline Castell. And we were in the lobby of Fermi Lab in Batavia, Illinois, and a woman came up to me, recognizing me, and said, I'm a reader of your books, and I really like them. And I felt fucking good.
I bet.
And I say that because I don't want people to feel that they are being led by the nose to some answer or some point of view, certainly not from me. And we have to know things before we determine their worth. And
right. Well said.
People say these things, success, money can't make you happy. Well, don't be so fucking sure until you have that and then can evaluate what that is.
Good call.
A
lot of broke people saying money doesn't bring you happiness.
What's that?
A lot of broke people saying.
A lot of broke people say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of them. I've been one of them.
Wouldn't give up money for everything. If Krishna came to them and said, "Hey, have I got a deal for you?" I write about this I got a book called Daydream Believer, and I write about this. And I swear, man, you cannot fucking make this stuff up. Several years ago, and this is in the beginning of the book, some guy writes an essay on the New York Times op-ed page, coveted page, that we as a culture need to embrace mediocrity. We got to stop racing for the top. Come on, everybody. There's only so much room at the top. That's not where happiness is. And I kid you not, and check me on this. Anybody thinks I'm exaggerating? The fucking essay was on that coveted page because the guy writing it, who is a school teacher from Princeton, New Jersey, won first place in an essay writing contest sponsored by the Brooklyn Public Library, the prize being your essay gets onto the New York Times op-ed page.
Wow.
I bet that was a very fucking happy day in his home when they got that phone call. And the essay is about the joys of mediocrity. I don't buy that, man. And I'm telling you that we as seekers must verify. And it's insufficient to say things about money or success or notice. Well, then I would say to my friend from Princeton, New Jersey, then why didn't you just turn down the prize and say, just give it to the runner-up? I mean, you were probably very happy. That article is probably framed in that guy's house, And
totally.
It'd be framed in my house too. Good for you.
But it's kind of an illusion.
I don't.
It's a framed illusion.
I don't believe in the message.
Right.
And I won't believe in a message, and I ask people listening to us not to believe in a message until they have verified it. I hear lots of people say, "Oh, money, success doesn't make me happy." Really? So, are you quitting your coveted position and going to do something much more private in a town much less filled with culture and cameras than New York City or Los Angeles or whatever? I just really want people to verify these things for themselves because we read these statements all the time, or we hear them, or they get repeated in this platitudinous way in our heads. And one has to know. I didn't write my first book. I didn't publish my first book, Occult America, until I was 43, going on 44. My life is a lot happier now than it was before that time when I felt a certain degree of, I would say, quiet agony that I had abandoned and left behind writing. Today, at age 60, I'm a hell of a lot happier than I was at...
You're 60, dude? That's nuts! Oh my God, That's wild. You are the youngest 60-year-old I know,
Well,
period.
It's all that Christian Science. I thank you. I thank you. And
Yeah.
I'm a great deal happier than I was at age 60, today at 60 than I was at 30. I'm a great deal happier than I was had I not rediscovered writing. So I can't look at that stuff and say, samsara, Maya,
Yeah.
that stuff has been actualizing for me, if I can use that word.
Absolutely. And I want to go back to the compliment that you received and for recognition of your writing recently, and that you just gave the example, and that it felt good,
Yeah.
I wonder, I think it would be probably helpful to because I have a feeling I know, and I'm being presumptuous here, but that I know what that good feeling is, but we don't normally look at it that deeply. We just, in the moment, we're trying to be gracious, one, and also to be in the long lineage of people who have written something and motivated somebody else is a wonderful thing. I wonder, though, if the goodness that you feel, the rooted goodness, is that you know what it's like to have a Neville Goddard in your life, to have read his words, and it's still alive in you today. It's motivating you to do the work that you're doing still, and that you're in the canon of writers, or you're in the team of people who have written things that have motivated other people. Maybe that feeling yourself in the lineage of writers within these traditions who have set people on a path that is endless for them. Maybe that's what feels good about it.
I dig that. I appreciate that. I appreciate that, because I don't want to do anything that steers people into a ditch, that makes it harder for people to think, that makes it harder for people to self-verify things. And I'm struck. I don't know if this relates precisely to what you said, but I was struck by there was a story told by a guy, he's now dead. He was a Zen prison minister, and he said he visited a prison once, and he met with some incarcerates, and one of them came up to him and said, "Oh my God, I've read your books. I can't believe I'm meeting you. This is so far out." And the minister said back to him, "Hey, it's not the man, it's the message." And later he felt really badly about that, because he realized that this incarcerate, who does not have a happy life, is having a moment of joy, and he took it from him. He took it
That's
from
right.
him for some holy lesson.
That's
and
right.
I really loved that story. It sort of relates to what we were talking about earlier, like, let the other person have his or her experience rather than disclaim the validity of this guy's being so excited to meet someone, an author whose books he's read, right here inside the prison. Why take that? Why take that? And I really
My guru,
like that story.
Yeah, me too. My Tibetan guru, Lama Lunong Rinpoche, he has 3 specific teachings for me, and just designed for me. And they're not. I think that they have wide usage. They could general usage for anyone, but I want to be specific that he's given these to me. One of them is this thing here that you're talking about. He says, "Don't obstruct people's kindness." And he's saying that to me because we can go for years. I wandered in samsara myself. I was a drug addict and a traumatized person when I was younger, and I just had a voracious appetite for drugs, and I stole and I lied and all that kind of stuff early on in my life. And one of the things I did is I knew, my grandmother was this devout Christian Scientist, and she had broken her leg, and they gave her Vicodin. So I went over and I stole the Vicodin from her, because I was thinking, well, she's a Christian Scientist, she doesn't need this anyway.
She'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly. And that was perfect. And I also stole her wedding ring, which had been in a box for years, and she was married to a man that abused most of my family. And so I thought, I'm stealing this, and this is like I'm doing her a favor by taking this, kind of thing. Yeah. So I've been of that background, but the thing around don't obstruct people's kindness is that now, since I'd had that background and then I'd found a spiritual path and then I'd turned a corner on my life and became more service oriented and thinking outside of myself and all these things that, that you could feel like you've been rescued. I mean, it even talks about in the AA, so-called big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it says that we're survivors of a shipwreck. And it feels that way. And so you've been saved, and it could just be like, oh, thank God for AA. Thank God for, Emmett Fox, who I found 10 years into AA and on my own. And then I to come to find out that Emmett Fox's book, Sermon on the Mount, was the first book that they used prior to there being a big book. It's the book. It was the book that they huddled around and read in meetings until Bill Wilson could read. But that being said, just coming back to the thing about don't obstruct people's kindness, my thing is like, I had been hurt most of my life and hurt other people. Then I got saved, and it's so easy to see that I didn't do the saving. Like people were influences, and so I would go. Somebody would say, "Oh, you're so kind, Jaymee," and I go, "Oh, no, it's my teachers, And right there, that might be the first time that someone is experimenting with generosity. It may be the first time that they've gone beyond themselves and they're in a practice of going, oh, I want to think about others. That really meant something to me. I want to tell Jaymee. I don't normally tell people that I appreciate what they're doing, but I want to go tell them. And then they come to me and they go, hey, Jaymee, you're so kind. That's so nice of you to do. And I go, oh, no, not me. I'm a clumsy, blah, blah, blah. It was my teachers. I would, and I would do that. And he said, when you do that, you may be stopping someone from ever trying to be generous again.
It's so beautifully put. It's kind of like when someone dies and you say, "Oh, I'm sorry," and someone tells you, "Don't be sorry." And it's
why are we doing this?
Sorry, It's call it a figure of speech. If I say God bless you, don't tell me you're an atheist. It's like I'm not disrespecting your atheism. It's just it's a show in my own awkward way of solidarity with the other person, however awkward it is, and just let it be, man. At the same time, one of the things I try to do, and I do a lot of this in the new book, best as I'm able, I try to be transparent because I don't like the way spiritual communicators cop to stage personas, and there's so much of that in our fucking spiritual culture. And
totally.
I worked in corporate publishing for 27 years, so I worked with a not inconsiderable number of the household names, and they are as weak or weaker than I am in terms of being. And they get enraged, they freak out over small things, they send people home crying.
Totally.
They're as terrible as any of us. And
man.
And they comp to attitudes when the camera's on that are false. And I'm not in a position, I'm not disclosing things from people's private lives. I can disclose enough from my fucking private life, which I do in the book. But I feel strongly that how much greater would it be for the search? How much greater would it be for the exchange if the headset-wearing, best-selling New Age author would say, I do have a problem with rage, and I do fucking send people home crying, and give us a sense not only that they're not on some different rung or echelon, but that the forces facing all of us are so extreme, and that would help people realize the gravity of the situation that we are in, that there is so much in the way of countervailing forces to the search. One of the things I write about in Esoterika is something that's changed recently in my life, but I'm glad it's in there. I, several times in the book, talk about drinking bourbon and smoking weed every fucking night. That's not sustainable. And I've recently really pulled back on that in a very serious way. But it was true for many years of my life. And I wanted it to be in there because why am I doing it? To manage stress, to come down after oh, I don't know, things that I enjoy like this, and my energy drops. And so that's a way of kind of letting go of the day or compensating for the drop in energy or all the obvious reasons why we do it, because it's fun being high. At least it is for the first 45 minutes. And then maybe it's not so fun. And I want people to know that, because I don't want people to feel that there's something available to this guy, who has a byline or is doing this or is doing that or whatever. It's the forces against us are terrifying, and they should be understood as terrifying. And I don't want somebody to mistake that. And we can all search together in a more real way if we're upfront about that.
You know what? I had a gathering last year for my birthday. I usually have my guru come into town and come to our house. And because I don't like birthdays, I enjoy that there's I enjoy that there are power. I'm not worried about I'm not worried about getting older as much as I just don't like forced same thing that you're talking about like the person on the stage or the or whatever it is. I don't like performative we're supposed to be happy because it's this day, and so to counteract that, I know that people want to see me on my birthday, so I would bring my guru into town and have him sit here on my bed and and we'd have a party here to come visit with my guru, and I'd just introduce them to him, and they would tell him their stories about what's going on. He'd give advice, and that's a way of me having a birthday party, right? But through that, at one of these gatherings, my father came. And my father, he lives, I live in Ojai, by the way. I don't know if you know that.
I was wondering.
Yeah. And, Krishnamurti Center is like 5 minutes from my house. I go there often and meditate in his bedroom, and it's a wonderful place. Terrific. Yeah, it's amazing. Great. I'd love to, if you're ever out here on the West Coast.
I would dig that. Yeah,
that'd be rad. So my dad came, and my dad could look at this scene, and it looks like maybe that, in Annie Hall, there's that party that Woody Allen goes to in LA when he's chasing her, and this where Jeff Goldblum says, I forgot my mantra.
Yes, I remember it. Yeah.
So it can kind of look like that without the drugs, it could just look like a scene, and, people talking to people. And I missed out on the counterculture of the 60s. And so I've been kind of trying to recreate it in my own life, And so my dad comes, though, and he sees this, and he's a counterculturist, and he's a fan of mine, but also he could step into this and go, wow, what a beautiful life you have. He's like, because my dad's life these days is, he spends a lot of time alone, he and his wife and my stepmom, they are getting older in age, and they're not a part of scenes, and they're not at the parties and all that kind of stuff. So he could come into this and just go, like, wow, look at this beautiful life that you have, and almost going like, must be nice kind of thing, and I don't know if he was doing that, but what I wanted to say to him in that moment, and I did, I said, you see beauty, and all I see is this all came from the dirt, like everything good in my life came from the dirt. It grew from maybe my worst moments, and there's no separation from the now flower that's growing that people go, oh, wow, nice life. And it's like, yeah, this came from the shit. It came from the worst. This is all an extension of manure. And that's what I wish that more spiritual teachers who are on the podium were doing. They were getting their hands dirty with the people, letting them know that they came from where they came from, and that everything they see is dirt. It's dirt grew this, Yeah. It seems like it magically came through this, that, or the other thing, but it's all from the dirt, at least in my life, So
I like that, and I like people to. I like us to talk about death. I like us to talk about suffering. You were talking about rape in your ancestry, and I think there's I'll talk about my ancestry. I mean, there's a debt there. Here I am seated in Brooklyn. the air conditioning is on. I'm here. I am drinking water out of a fucking plastic bottle. God knows where that's going, in someone's backyard, and so on and so on and so forth. And there's no bombs falling on me. People in my ancestry went through hell to get here, and there's a debt there, and I think that debt, it has to be paid, and I don't talk about it in terms of money alone because I want it to be broadly defined, but nor do I want to exclude money. And it's very difficult, I find, to talk to people about debt because they either want to go to a very narrow place with it where it just involves money, or they want to go to a very broad place with it where money is not under consideration. And I don't think any of that is sufficient. There's a dialogue in the book of Talmud where a master is asking his students the signs of an evil man, and they all give very good answers. And one student says, "He who borrows and does not repay." And the master says, in effect, "I approve of your words above the others because the others are contained in yours." So what does it mean to borrow and not repay? And this idea that these circumstances that I live in are not because I'm wonderful. It's people have suffered so that I could be here. And of course, there's people suffering half a world away that didn't do anything wrong. It's just, Gurdjieff would call it planetary influences. And it's entirely incidental to the life of the individual. And I live in a place where we pretend to recycle, and some other guy lives in a place where the landfill, arrives. And and I'm not a good guy, because I'm on the end of the pretending to recycle. And I try to think about debt, and I try to think about. I don't speak too frequently in terms of karma because it's so vast a framing. It's too vast to speak about.
You get sidetracked too. I mean,
it really can become a trap. And I'm with John Lennon. I wish there was instant karma, and sometimes perhaps there is, but it's so vast a topic. But I do think that reciprocity and suffering and debt, I'm a little more comfortable with those terms. And I think that we in the spiritual culture also, we have very weird attitudes about money. We talk about abundance and livelihood and the, right livelihood and how to fit abundance rightly into your spiritual practice. Whereas money is the chief and most omnipresent, empirical, concrete, tactile human exchange there is. And so I asked the person in the search, having a relationship with money, to me, is the search, because that is the most common exchange of our human existence. It's omnipresent. It's everywhere. It's deeply felt. And I think this is sort of a tangent, so forgive me, but I think the Maharishi really understood that. And people grumble and moan about, paying for TM, and it's like, I take my kids to a sporting event. I buy a $40 pretzel. I mean, what the hell is wrong with me?
Dude,
and I'm
totally.
Do it tomorrow, And I think we have a very what do we value, for God's sake? And
I was thinking about that price tag recently, and I was going, okay, well, let's say that before this was available to get a mantra through the David Lynch Foundation, and I know you and I are both fans of Bobby, and over with the David Lynch Foundation and TM. But the thing about that price tag, the $800 price tag or something, and I go, okay, well, what did it used to be like to get a sacred mantra made of sacred syllables coming from somewhere that you trust? You would have to go to India. Not just going to India would mean that you would find that mantra, or that you would find the teacher who would be the perfect person to give you that thing that you're going to practice the rest of your life. So it used to cost a lot more money and time and all this stuff. And I think that they've made it accessible when you look at it in those terms, they made it kind of accessible. And I'm not defending. I was kind of against the price tag on getting a mantra for a long time, and it was one of my grumbles. But then, but then through the process, like you're saying, of just looking at the world and where my paradoxes are and where I'm, just seeing myself in all things, I go, well, let me look at this. Oh yeah, I guess it's actually kind of a pretty good deal considering all the work that you would have to do back in the day to get a mantra.
I mean, in a medical office, I spend $800 on
bullshit.
A visit that may or may not even be valid or worthwhile. I mean, Jesus Christ, it's the price of a dental cleaning if you live in a fancy neighborhood. You know what I mean?
Right. No, it's
we
true.
Just need to. I mean, look. My feeling is just the following: that we in the spiritual culture, we need to understand that there is debt in life, and that debt is going to come in myriad forms. One of which is money, and I think that a person should just be very realistic about that. And there was a senior member of the Gurdjieff work who once said, the only things you really have to give another person are time or money. And of course, it's the expression with which everybody immediately wants to argue. What about? And it's
right.
like, I can't help I'm not gonna foster a rhetorical argument back and forth with that statement. I consider that statement truth. And I think that the individual who abides it as truth is doing something worthwhile in his or her life.
You would only be formulating a rhetorical response to what I call these days like a mind is like the bottom of a shoe. We just don't know where it's been. And it looks like it's a regular brain from the outside or something, but it's tracking in all this stuff from who knows where that you're not even aware of, that each person isn't aware of. And that's what I would be arguing with. It's like the logic of arguing with the bottom of a shoe. All these different things that have come together that you don't know where they've been or what if they've been verified or they're sacred, even though, and that type of thing. So I just don't do that so much anymore. Try and make what works for me palatable for other people, unless they're asking. And if they're really asking because they're curious about how you do your thing, that seems to be the best place to be able to share.
I like holding ourselves to some sort of astringency and the astringency of giving money, giving time. It's so trackable, and it doesn't lead into these highly conceptualized discussions about good vibes and things of that nature, which you can do too.
That's right.
I welcome it. Anybody who wants to send me good vibes is very welcome. But the exchange that holds the giving party or the receiving party to a certain astringency, it has something that I think is valuable for us on the path.
Mm-hmm. When we were talking about cults earlier, I was picturing, and you were talking about how people judge cults and they judge, things that they're just walking into or hearing, and now you don't even like the word cult because it's just, I relate to all that. And I was thinking about what if a person who is sensitive, has very sensitive ears, and is used to money, is used to food being very cheap, and they're visiting our country for the first time, and we take them to a Dodger game or a baseball game. Could that feel like to that person who's never experienced baseball that they're in the midst of a cult? In the way that all these people seem to get very angry and very upset and cheer at the same time. Everything's more expensive. It's almost like it's gouging you intentionally. And then you get hit by a foul ball or something on the head. And this could be an experience where you go like, oh no, baseball, that was like a really bad experience. They're loud. It's expensive. I got hit by a baseball. There was a fight over here. Like, well, that seems like something. And we all know the holiness of baseball. We're kind of in on the joke with it, that it is kind of like a thing that it is kind of like a cult. in this way. Like we there's the leaders, there's the the people that we just all worship when they, and the whole thing
Call and
is
response. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Like a revival meeting. Yeah.
You use baseball references in your writing.
Sometimes, I will use the term cult now and again, but I encourage its use to be sparing because it is real. Look, I mean, there are these isolating, abusive communities of belief, and if I had someone I love who was involved in one of those communities, I'd be alarmed. But heterodoxy is not a cult. Being small and unusual or weird is not a cult. And of course, I also have to respect that people do find the search sometimes in these small, almost capillary-like communities, some of which have done a lot to open up the culture of search in this country, like the Shaker movement, for example.
Right.
And some of which started out as groups that were considered very heterodox and out of step, like the Millerites in central New York, who became Seventh-day Adventism. And I really want to be very flexible about abiding other people's searches, and I'm interested in other people's searches. And my faith in human nature is very low, and so it's human nature that I'm critical of, not critical of, oh my God, what are you guys doing theologically? And maybe I'm damn interested in it. I may be very interested in what so-and-so is doing theologically. It's human nature in general that...
Is it human nature or is it conditioned nature? Like that's
a good question. It's a good question. Yeah.
Because, I mean, I guess human nature is to want to connect. So that which we're given options to connect with that seem to lead the modernity in importance are the things that the human nature that we have that are these dangling connections just waiting to connect to something that we haven't been given great options. And so I wonder if it's that part where we can get fooled that would be considered the human nature that you don't have faith in, is that we can be fooled if we have these dangling connections. But human nature itself, the part of us that wants to connect, might be purer to look at, and maybe not the exact thing that you mean. I'm not sure. Well,
I have been influenced by a line of thought from Gurdjieff, which I feel as a verified truth, and that is that humanity in its present form is just completely upside down, that we are absolutely asleep and pass through life in automaticity. Everyone on earth agrees on one thing: war is terrible. It accomplishes nothing. There should be no more war. And we keep sustaining them and having them in the certainty that it's absolutely necessary. Maybe it is, but it contradicts everything that everyone down to every individual would say. And we have all these different works of wisdom literature that would be enough to save us if they were capable of penetrating. The Beatitudes, the Tao Te Ching, the Bhagavad Gita, the Dhammapada, Marcus Aurelius, take your pick. If any one of those penetrated, it would be sufficient to save humanity. And we all agree with them. You'll not find a person on earth who doesn't agree with, the Sermon on the Mount, Marcus Aurelius, the Tao Te Ching. We agree with them in an armchair. And then in life, they simply do not penetrate, and they don't change being. Not because there's anything wrong with those works. We all know them to be true.
Right.
But they do not penetrate. And so I feel humanity is in a very broken state. There is a different possibility. I think it's so far away, it's all but impossible. That's my
Gotcha. So, who's the new baby in your life? Is the new Woodbury baby? I saw that there was a post. Is that
Jason
a grandson?
Woodbury, a great music journalist and podcaster, and he and his
okay.
wife just had a newborn. So that was
Nice.
yeah,
I noticed that on your thing. I was like, is Mitch a grandfather?
That's the new Woodbury. No, I have two sons. They're grown. I mean, my younger is 19 and my elder is 22. Yeah.
Okay, nice, man. I have a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old,
Okay.
a girl and a
Same
boy.
neighborhood. Yeah.
And I'm about to turn 50 in October, and my partner and I of 10 years, who were not trying, are having a baby. She's 9 weeks pregnant.
Okay.
Yeah. And just thinking about your human nature thing, thank you very much. Shock of my life. I'm 50 also. It's like kind of a miracle. She's 42 and was in premenopause. I'm almost 50. I use marijuana. So all the things are say that this would be an impossibility. And so when something like this comes to me, and you'll be an appreciator of this, especially after a great period of prayer that I was doing leading up to getting this information, I was praying like, maybe I'm off track. Even in all of my accomplishments and all of what feels good and what I figured out in this world, maybe I'm off track still. Redirect me if I am. And within a day, there was this positive pregnancy test.
Remarkable.
It really is. And it feels like a compliment because I just graduated my 18-year-old. I mean, he graduated himself. I didn't do shit. He graduated. But I watched it and I nurtured him throughout his life. And to be given this opportunity again, it feels like God's compliment. It's like, like, especially in these miraculous conditions, it's unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, it keeps you young too, because you get taken out of the comfort zone of, okay, you'll be on the move. You'll be on the move. And that
if I'm going to look like you, I'm going to be fine. I'm taking it directly from the guru of looking great at 60. But I guess I was just thinking about the baby. And whenever you see a baby, and we wouldn't go, oh, there's human nature here, like it's just confused and all that. We would see the baby as this potential, early on. And I know like how far off it feels like we are from progress and how asleep people are, and the texts are here and they've been here forever, and people are almost ignoring them or talking about them in an intentional way from the armchair, like you were saying, but not applying it. An application is everything. It's the lifeblood. It's what keeps it alive, is like practicing inconveniently. Especially inconveniently. But I was just thinking about why I challenged you on the human nature thing is because I think we're perfect and corruptible from the beginning. I think that we're perfect and corruptible throughout. I think there's a perfection that is within every human being, and the options haven't been great and the importances haven't been great, but put into the right household or the right, area or whatever, the right conditions, that human nature can yield a Christ, or it can yield a Buddha or and I want to just really quickly also, the last thing I want to ask you about, and thank you so much, by the way, this has been a
pleasure.
fucking 2-hour jam, dude. It's it's like uneditable too. It's just so perfect. I just love I just love it so much. I was thinking about Christianity, and I was, as you know, I was raised what I was raised, and then I look at the landscape of Christianity in our country, and I have no, personally, after 20 years of Vajrayana Buddhism and writings of Emmett Fox and Joel Goldsmith and so on and so forth, the Kabbalion and which I'd love to also talk to you about, but I was thinking. But I was thinking about the idea of as Christ as a figure in this country, as the lead figure, and that people, their obedience to this figure in their minds that represents the only way, the only way to enlightenment, the only way to safety, the only way to God through Christ, right? And and that Christ represents this unconditional love if you're down with him.
Yeah.
If you're down,
right.
Right. But if you're not, then like you're over there, you're out, you're not you're a part of the rapture or whatever the heck, all that stuff. So, but he unconditionally loves those who love him is a theory. So I wanted to read you something from, Living the Infinite Way by Joel S. Goldsmith.
Oh, wow. Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. And this was his companion to The Infinite Way.
Yep.
And he died in his 50s like Yogananda, young man. So this is about prayer. And I couldn't wait to read you this actually, because it's been blowing my mind. And since I've been reintroduced to this through just picking up the book and that I read 13 years ago that started me very much on this particular length of the path that I'm on. It's returned me to the mechanics of prayer. And I just want to, this is where I'll read from here. In order to rightly understand the subject of prayer, we must this instant give up our human judgment as to good and evil. No longer can we gratify our sense of psychological wisdom by judging those of our family, business, or community circles, but we must relinquish and withdraw our opinions of good and evil, intelligent or stupid, honest or dishonest, moral or immoral, and look at each individual with no condemnation, no criticism, and with no judgment, but only the realization that God is. God is, life is. We are permitted no further judgment. God is. It is a matter of training oneself to form no opinion whatsoever. There can be no spiritual demonstration while we hold to opinions of good and evil. When we look at the world with no opinions, judgments, or labels, not even good ones, but with the realization that God is, we set up a sort of vacuum within. Into that vacuum surges the spiritual wisdom defining and evaluating that which is before us. And this we find to be entirely different from our human estimate. Into our consciousness, there comes a warmth, a feeling of love for mankind, and the realization that God is the allness of being. As one beholds the revelation of spiritual truth, he becomes ready for the next step, the step that makes him a healer, a savior, a reformer, a supplier in the universe. Now comes the time we must look at every condition, be it imprisonment in a prison, Damien Eccles, shout out. Imprisonment in a sick body, imprisonment in a lack or limitation, and withdraw the opinion of good or evil. Now, this was his way of saying this is how we pray. Now, I'm not saying he's the authority on all this at all, but I have it's similar to Buddhism, which I was struck with immediately. It's like, give up your idea of what's pure and impure in this world and see yourself in all beings. See them all as your children. And this even says, don't even do that. It's just saying God is. It's just hold yourself to what you know God is within yourself, no matter what you're faced. And that's an attunement to God or a prayer. What do you think about that?
Well, I wrestle with it. I like the idea of suspending views of good and evil because I, for example, am sometimes judged to be evil, and I've known the brunt of that. And in one sense, I like the heterodoxy of his message. In another sense, I tend to think of purpose nowadays as self-expression, and I'm very honoring of the individual. And I would like to have known Joel Goldsmith because he emits a kind of intellectual integrity, and I've always liked him enormously as a figure. I do feel that the expressiveness that Joel, for example, brought to his life, or the expressiveness of a secular critic of metaphysics like Christopher Lasch brought to his life, was eminent from a right relationship in the right place, the right time that was fertile to either man's intellect. And I can think about situations I've been in that have been where I have been egregiously misplaced. And you see that in the lives of a lot of people. You see that in the lives of a lot of adolescents. And I think there was a time and a place in my search where Joel's statement would have sat very well with me, and where I engaged in or strove for the very thing, that the ideal that he's describing. And I feel differently nowadays at this juncture in my search, because I feel that the individual must be in right relationship. And so, for example, if I'm in proximity to another party who is cruelly limiting of what I'm attempting to do in the world, and that can come in very ordinary ways. There exists something that needs to be changed. There exists something that needs to be overcome. There is a before and an after.
Right.
There is a paucity of right relationship and right expression. And so I more think in terms of the individual finding relationship, conditions, environment, timing, expression that permits a flowering of self, a creativity, a self-expression broadly defined. And that anything that curbs that, I don't want to be around.
Yeah.
And that's my approach at this juncture in my
Discernment. It sounds like discernment and right relation. Those are both terms that I get down with also. I mean, having discernment with who you talk to, or like who you involve yourself with, all that is so important. And at the same time, coming back to the modern view of Christ, and if you're down with me, then cool, then, but, and it's even, if you read the words that he said, you could interpolate that as being accurate. You could say, I am the way, I am the truth, I'm the, it's like, it's only through me. And what I felt like Christ was almost saying, and I mean, this is my own interpretation of it, was sort of like, well, this is the only thing going here right now that's like this, so like, not so much like that he might not have been that boastful, even though it is a definitive. It may have just been like, hey, that other thing that's going on is not it. Like, this is what I've found is an access point to that. But I bet if he were asked, he wouldn't say, well, it's the only access point. And that Christ in India that they called Buddha, he's wrong. And,
I think that's a very true reading of what's reached us from Christ's words. There's an antinomian quality. There's there is I'll leave it at that. There's an antinomian quality where, I'm coming with a sword to cut away excess, not to keep adding on excess, to tell you to worry about what comes out of your mouth versus what goes in it, to hold you on account for how you pay your neighbor, not for what seats you've purchased in the big house. And so I resonate with that. I like the anarchistic Christ that I think reaches us through the words that at least we have fragments of.
Right. And this unconditional love is what he represented. And and I wanted to describe, because people are like, well, how can Christ represent unconditional love when the people who follow him are sending people over to Iran and blah, 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 and, so on and so forth. How are they so us or them? And I go, I was looking at the notion of what that unconditional love is almost like, to them, it's like unconditional love of Christ and just things that are related to Christ. And that's where we have our little, that's not unconditional love, it's conditional love. But I was looking at what unconditional love is, and I was asking myself yesterday, and I was saying, it's the ability to see a story wherever you go, for one. It's the ability to cut right through the surface level appearance and to see that this thing that's presenting to you is a story. It's a part of a long continuation of a drama that you weren't there for. And now it's presenting in this way as either an obstacle or something that's inviting you in. Either. But we look at it as a story and not a solid truth. And then on top of that, if we can go beyond the story and love it beyond the way that it's presenting, not just see the story, but inconveniently find love for the person caught up in that drama. That is my version of unconditional love. It's and I don't think that's the one that most people are talking about, is the one that goes beyond a self and how this is affecting me. It's more like conditional love dressed up as unconditional love. What do you think?
Well, we human beings in general, that whether one calls it a cult, whether it's the mainstream religions, for me personally, I distrust, dislike, even disdain most human nature. I think we make rules, we slam doors, we tell other people what to do, we self-position, we bullshit. And I think the message of Christ is wonderful. I'm not remotely surprised that some people who follow it are wonderful people, and some people who follow it are horrible people who wouldn't know, if you handed them an ice cream cone, they'd eat it from the bottom because they are just completely without orientation towards other people or the objects of life.
That was such a kind version of that. I've heard it so many other ways.
and I can't tell you the number of people who have come up to me over the years professing love and service, who would be the first ones to gossip or fuck with me or kick me out of something or profess some negative thing about me after trying to expose me to laws of universal love and service. And I'm mistrusting of that, all of that verbiage. I think less in terms of love, frankly, than I do in terms of generosity, because it's more measurable. And I know this is going to sound quotidian as hell, and there's going to be people who hear it and think like, "Oh, for God's sake!" But it's my search. We took a cab home from the airport the other day, and the cab driver was very nice, helped with the luggage. I tipped him very appropriately, and then I gave him an extra $5 when I got out of the cab, just because I thought he was a good guy. We checked out of a New Age facility. We've been to 2 New Age facilities, actually 3, over the past 10 days. I've been traveling, doing some stuff, and I left what I think were significant tips for the house cleaning staff, because I recognize that this is not a fun job, and that might be an opportunity to order Domino's for the kids tonight, and maybe take it a little easy or something. I'm a hell of a lot more interested in those small gestures than I am in the comments that our spiritual cultures, engage in about loving humanity and so forth. I don't love humanity. I love my wife. I love my 2 kids. I have a couple of other family members. I find humanity a war-making, privileged, self-positioning, highly troublemaking, if sometimes ingenious mass covering this earth of ours. And there are exceptions to that. And there are people of lovely sensitivity and emotions and empathy. And if I speak in terms of ethics, I speak in terms of empathy. And I am so individually touched sometimes by people whose presence I really just love. I was at a Theosophy conference, and there was a woman in attendance there who a couple of years ago was the president of the Theosophical Society, and I just think she's just a wonderful person because she emanates something. There's a sensitivity to her. And if she were at a Christian Science church or at a dojo or at no particular spiritual venue at all, I would dig her because I feel that there's a fineness to her emotions. That's a kind of person I relate to. And I step very carefully around most other kinds of people.
Well, you know what? I want to be your friend.
I'm down for it. I'm down
Because I need a good punk rock, new thought metaphysics friend, because I usually make those, and they're usually the most meaningful relationships, spiritual practitioners who have this punk rock edge, and I'm kind of I'm kind of the more groovy or something, the more like love and light without that. I mean, but anyway, I just love it. I love your challenges are all true about humanity. And at the same time, I'm compelled to see beyond my own mind. So, and I'm compelled daily to see beyond my own mind and all the people that I've been, and I do practice sort of seeing people as my children and as my lovers and all that stuff. And they're all disappointing, they're all as those things at times, but it doesn't stop. It's like, I guess my teacher also, one of the things that he says is, when people say, why aren't you angry about Trump? He goes, angry? He's like, why would I want to have anger inside my body? That only hurts me.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, he may have effectively, for the first time in my life, shown me that whole thing that I've heard forever. It's like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die, kind of thing. That resentment is that, but we get hurt by it. And I'm kind of like a ambassador of keeping this place a loving place. It doesn't mean that I do it ignorantly, where I just look past where people are being conniving or charlatans, all that stuff. It's like my biggest pet peeves are charlatans or people who are on the path who are doing all this other stuff that doesn't reflect the same readings that you and I have read, around these things. And at the same time, I see that they're all lost. They're all lost, and some of them have buoys that they're holding on to in the ocean, and others are just drowning. And I go, that's me. That's been me. That's been me. That's been me. And so, anyway, maybe this could be a complimentary friendship between us both, because I love the punk rock.
I'm totally down for it. I'm totally down for it. I'll tell you something very funny. This is going to sound so silly. I was friends at one time, believe it or not, with a high-ranking person in the Trump administration, and I tried and failed to get somebody there to get involved with human rights abuses against people accused of witchcraft, which is a very serious issue in Saudi and some other countries that we're buddying up to. And obviously, I failed. Once in a great while, I'll get to know somebody influential and try to do something. Usually failing.
Well, we got psychedelics passed through, right? Rogan got psychedelics passed through, or something, or decriminalized,
I think he did, as a matter of fact,
or something like that. So your swing was for witches to be advocated for, and like you win some, you lose some, I guess.
It's funny. Once in a while, an individual can, I don't know, a little wrinkle, turn a screw. I'm not as involved in politics as I once was, and I think your guru's assessment is right.
Yeah, sure. Hey, man, thank you. This next talk I want to do is about the Kabbalion. If you'd come back on, and even Buddhism at a certain point, just to vamp out on that from your studies. So I'd like to do this again, but your time is the most valuable thing to me.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you've been so generous here today. And as a part of my bona fides, I will say that the other day, when you wrote me and said that Jaymee and Eccles had suggested that you come on this and that he had encouraged you to, and then you reach out to me, I was going, I processed it on the spot, and I got goosebumps, and I was so thrilled. And then an hour passed, and I had only done it in the privacy of my heart, seen that Jaymee and Eccles, who I just have such respect for, and it was almost like I was so nervous to talk to him, because it's like, what do you say to somebody who's been through all that? And the good thing is that, it's a lot of listening. So I just did a lot of listening. But I just love him so much, and that someone like him would suggest me to you, who I've also been an appreciator of. I had to, an hour later, turn to my partner and go like, honey, I have to tell you this, like, because it feels like it needs acknowledgement outside of myself. But like, Damien just said that Mitch, like he sung my praises, is Mitch's words, like, about coming on this show. And we took a second and just, I felt so special, and I still do.
I appreciate that. It was a group of, we were out at the Omega Institute, which is up in the Hudson Valley.
Yeah.
And he came, it was just an amazing, the whole thing was great. A friend of his was there and said, Mitch is here, and Damien came over and we all had lunch and hung out. And I asked him, and he was like, absolutely. And he was very full throated about it. And as soon as lunch was over, the first thing I did was I wrote to you, and I'm so glad that he showed up and that he was able to say that to me, and through him, we connected. I'm very grateful, and he was, of course, right.
Dude, awesome. Thank you, Mitch, so much, man.